This panel is powered by Babel Street, a gold sponsor. Babel Street is the world's leading AI-enabled data to knowledge company. The technology enables clients to identify, organize, and analyze data, regardless of its location or language. Babel Street products streamline the process of turning data into knowledge by automatically converting client selected data from over 200 languages to their native language. All publicly available or private data sources can be rapidly deciphered by Babel Street software and utilized to maximize the effectiveness of clients' decision-making processes. With the aid of Babel Street tools, analysts are able to easily filter information to be used in an endless number of ways. Everything from deriving large consumer and social trends to identifying threats to a public location or a singular person's life. The company provides organizations with the ability to activate relevant data and act on it faster than ever before. Babel Street is privately held and is headquartered in the Washington, D.C. area. It also has offices in London and Canberra. So please visit Babel Street booth in the exhibition area today or tomorrow. You can set up meetings and chat with the Babel Street representatives at their booth. So let's thank them for their participation. We greatly appreciate the support. Now, we will hear from our distinguished panel, David Broughton, the research director at Street & Smith's Sports Business Journal, Mario Catano, the vice president of operations and security for the Toronto Blue Jays, Rogers Center, and Richard Geller, a partner at Pillsbury Law. Our panelists today will discuss COVID-19 business implications, effect on policy and actions for the operations and financial well-being of sports and entertainment organizations. The panel explores the business implications from the COVID-19 pandemic, including its effects on policy or action on the operations or financial well-being of sports and entertainment organizations. Let's go around and have each of you introduce yourselves and talk about what the potential business implications of the COVID-19 pandemic and what may face the future sports and entertainment industry as we return to work, play, and spectate. So let me start with David.
This is David Braun. I'm also in Charlotte.
Yes.
It was sunny. Yeah.
It was. Yes.
Really, the most saddest thing I think about the summer is the minor league baseball situation. We're facing the possibility of losing 40 different markets, 40 different venues, companies with employees that have been there for decades, and very, very uncertain what's going to happen to those buildings. And a lot of them, the argument about Major League Baseball is that these venues can't sustain professional baseball anymore, but a lot of them have had a lot of upgrades in recent years. So to me, that's really what I'm following the most, is what happens to the affordable family fun of minor league baseball, and are we going to have 40 empty buildings next year?
Yeah, I mean, that's had a tremendous impact all around the country with both professional and even amateur sports has been impacted by the same thing. Mario?
Good evening. It's Mario Catino, and I'm in Toronto, and I'm going to try to avoid the whole baseball question with the minor leagues. So I'll try to be impartial, but I think, as David said, it's obviously top of mind for us, and it impacts our business. I don't think as an industry, anyone truly believed the impact of COVID on our operation and our game would be as dramatic. and definitely sustained to the point where next year is still an unknown for us in terms of what does that look like from a business. David's right. We've been impacted by letting go a lot of our labor force, full-time, part-time. We have suppliers who've unfortunately are bankrupt because of lack of business. And so you realize that as an industry, what we do in the economy is so crucial. But more importantly is in the community, our fan engagement and what teams bring to a local city in terms of followership, but also pride has been lost. And so COVID has this dramatic impact that I don't think we're going to be able to measure until probably 2 or 3 years down the road. But for now, it's just managing what we know based on public health guidance and hopefully where our business is in terms of opening. Baseball is now in our off season and we're planning for next year, but we're looking at the other leagues to see exactly who is managing the best in terms of spectators, no spectators, how they're managing their sponsorship opportunities, but looking at the business and saying, how can we come out of this far better than we were going into this? And how can we prepare for the future should something similar like this happen again in the future? Gary's on mute.
Okay, and our next, Mr. Geller.
So, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So, just a little background. I'm an insurance recovery lawyer, which I like to tell this story that if I'm ever at a cocktail party and somebody asks me what kind of law I practice and I say insurance, suddenly everybody moves away from me at the cocktail party. But the minute I say I sue insurance companies for a living, everybody comes right back. They all have stories and conversations they want to engage in with me about insurance and how bad insurance companies can be at times. So, believe it or not, I've been working at home since March 12th, which is such an odd feeling, not having colleagues around to talk and throw ideas around, and everybody's adjusted to this new world. I'm a big sports fan, as you can guess. I'm a big Dodger fan, and I actually, when they made it to the World Series, I decided I was going to attend the game at Dallas. So I flew out, saw one of the games, and flew back a couple days later, and that was basically the only time I've been away from California since this whole thing started. The thing that I think impacts me a great deal about this and culturally wise, in the past when we had major incidents, we had entertainment and sports to attend and go to and look to as an outlet, as a way to get away from, the terrorist tragedies of 9/11 or, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, whatever it happened to be. This one is so different because we don't have that. The ability to go to a game or sit in a movie theater and just forget about it for a few hours, hopefully that'll come back soon. I know that, certain leagues are still wondering how it's going to impact next season. Mario, you mentioned it. I mean, the NHL is talking about having a 41 game regular season instead of 82 next year already. They've already missed all their preseason and, the first month and a half of what that should have been their regular season this year. It's ever changing, I guess, is the best way to say it.
Yeah, I mean, the impacts a lot of times, particularly the financial impacts across the board, certainly are not seen by the general public out there. But what are some of the long-term business impacts that this has caused, from a financial perspective to all these in the business and entertainment industry? And what's the potential for the recovery coming down the line? So let's start with you, David.
Well, the long term is, I mean, we don't know what the short term is. We've got to, Mario mentioned it already, saying what's the, we're sitting back looking at what everybody else is doing. It reminded me when we launched Sports Business Journal in '98, we had a hard time getting anybody to answer our calls. And every team owner, every GM, everybody at every league was saying, why would we buy a magazine to read about what the other leagues are doing? It was very, very a tunnel vision. And so that's one of the things I'm encouraged by right now is that, like Mario said, we're sitting back, we're looking what every other league, major league, minor league, doesn't matter if it's rugby, it could be curling. We're all trying to figure out what's next, not just long term, but short term. Mario again mentioned the supply chain. You know, a lot of companies gone bust. So you're looking more local. That's going to eventually help your bottom line. But just getting through the short term and sharing best practices across the sports spectrum, I think is what's going to get us into the next phase.
Yeah, and one of the significant impacts that I've heard is, you know, that a lot of these teams and production groups in the entertainment industry have had to lay off large numbers of personnel. And what has that meant, Mario, to this whole industry?
Well, you know, it's true is that we're thinking outside the box and trying to stay engaged with our fans when we can't host attendance. And so you've seen what the Red Sox have done with the virtual concert, and you look at Europe. So to David's point, you know, that's probably one thing, and thank God for the internet, is that, you know, at our fingertips, we can do our own research and find out what's happening internationally and try to learn from their experience. But I don't think COVID has developed a playbook for us to really follow right now. And so it's really a blank page, and it's up to us based on our local public health and our community to decide how we want to envision that reopening. Eventually, we'll be back. You're right. And, you know, as Richard said, I remember SARS, and I remember the Rolling Stones playing a benefit concert for the community as a way to get back to normal. And I was fortunate enough to work the New York Yankees and Arizona Diamondbacks games after September 11th for the commissioner's office. So I've seen the need for a normal way of life, but we're not going to know really what that is until we're probably well into this next year and beyond. You also have to think about our fans, and they have lost their jobs and they have limited resources. So are they still going to spend the same? So everything that we've based our business on is going to have to be reviewed and reinvented, if you will. Eventually we'll be back and people will be back. It's just going to probably take us a little longer. And we're going to rely on each other, whether you're the NFL or NHL or NBA, to say, what's working for you? Can it work for us? But we're going to have to look at it at a very local or regional perspective, because one size doesn't necessarily fit all. But we'll be back eventually. The question is how long, and our businesses will change. You know, we're probably not going to have as many employees. We can do more remotely. Can we leverage that to our advantage? Can we still stay communicated with our fans if they're not in the ballpark, and still deliver that experience of a live sporting event? Those are all challenges that I don't think right now we have those answers yet.
Wow. And then, Richard, what are the future insurance and contractual implications, you know, that's evolved as a result of this and caused, you know, these C-suites to relook at things?
I don't want to occupy or monopolize the entire rest of the presentation to talk about it in detail.
It's not a cocktail party. It's okay.
Okay. You know, Mario raised the issue of SARS, which, believe it or not, COVID-19 is actually the 7th epidemic or pandemic of this century. And when you look back, you wonder why. I guess maybe we were just lucky that none of the other ones had, you know, the medical issues and the death rates that this one does. But Gary, you brought up the point about insurance. I'm going to do a really quick insurance. Hopefully nobody falls asleep during this part of it. But so there are basically two types of insurance policies. There's first-party insurance coverage and third-party insurance coverage. First party is exactly that. If you, as the policyholder, is injured directly, you have a claim, usually homeowners insurance, auto policies, and then property policies for most businesses. Third party is if something you as a business did injures somebody else or has an impact on a third party, and then they sue you, third party insurance would come into play. So before January 1st of this year, companies, teams, leagues, anybody could buy event cancellation insurance, which is just that. It insures you if an event is canceled because of impossibilities. Um, so you mentioned contractual issues. I think force majeure clauses is something we can probably talk about a little later. But for right now, event cancellation insurance policies before January 24th of 2020, you could, for an additional about 18% of the total premium, buy an extension of coverage for communicable disease coverage. And a number of the sporting events that have been canceled because of COVID-19 had that coverage. For example, Wimbledon, back in 2003 when SARS hit, they realized, this could be an issue. So they spent a couple $1 million a year in extra premiums for the last 17 years, which sounds like a lot of money. So $34 million, but their payout under their insurance policy should be anywhere from $200 to $450 million because of the cancellation of Wimbledon this year. March Madness was canceled in March of 2020. They had an event cancellation policy. A number of conferences did. But for the most part, businesses, leagues, teams have something called property insurance, which covers you for all risks unless the risk is otherwise excluded. And most of those property policies have something called business interruption insurance. And while some of the intricacies of that policy are going to be played out in court, so far there's like 1,700 lawsuits filed on business interruption property damage policies across the country, restaurants, hotels, just regular businesses, gyms. And so we've been keeping very close track of all of that and how those are progressing and what kind of motions are being presented, and happy to talk about those during this as well. But that's kind of a broad overview of the insurance implications or impacts of insurance. It's going to be very tough to find that kind of insurance anymore. Starting January 31st, every insurer in the world now added COVID-19 exclusions to every policy. That, like everything else, will pass, but for right now, you can't even secure any coverage like that. So what's going to happen in 2021 is going to be an interesting issue when these events are canceled and they have no event cancellation insurance in place because they can't get the extended coverage or communicable disease insurance.
Right. Which kind of begs a whole nother area, like how fragile is the supply chain for the sports and entertainment industry? We're hearing this in all other sectors out there. I'm sure it must have an impact with you guys. And will the shortage of these supplies and skilled staff, when the operations are ready to gear back up, will it be there, ready to support and supply your needs? Mario?
Well, it really comes down to your business continuity plan. So I'll harp on emergency management for a moment.
Good point.
And this is really what we work on for months and years. I look back to September 11th, and we were always worried about a terrorist act, and we had all these policies and procedures. But this is really just one of those elements. You're right, and it definitely is going to impact us because what we saw was back in March, PPE, those inventories were just not there because they're all being allocated for the emergency services and the hospitals, which made sense. But the private sector, when we're now asking or looking at our businesses trying to secure the quantities that we needed to, it was a bit of a challenge. And then, of course, it was the quality and, counterfeit, KN95 masks and so forth. But from a staffing perspective, what we're thinking about is when we get back to normal, we're going to be competing to reopen our stadiums with every other business. And so the demand is going to be that much more on our supply chain because our vendors who we relied on for so many years may not be there anymore. They're no longer existing.
Yeah.
And so we need to constantly manage that list and ensure that we have an alternate source. And in some cases, having multiple agreements. If you are part of a larger company, having at least a procurement department that can help you with that is really helpful. Or maybe locally partnering with another organization and buying in bulk to get better pricing because ultimately a vendor is going to try to sell more in a timely fashion. I think our biggest challenge is going to be really our labor. Right now we have so many employees, our concession workers are off, our staff, frontline staff. When businesses reopen, they're going to be looking for that opportunity to make up for that lost income. So you're probably going to see an extra focus on paying more for that employee and trying to be competitive with the marketplace. And that's something that we're probably going to have to monitor. We let a lot of people go from the industry as a whole. So finding the skilled employee, they're going to be in demand if we start to resume our business. So I think that's where businesses will have to reinvent themselves and then look at the end of the day is what are they going to need to bounce back, if you will.
Gary, I'll jump in such that to add something to
Please.
Mario.
Yep.
Yeah, the labor thing I think is going to be huge afterward, because a lot of them were, working a few games a week and not making a whole lot of money anyway. But now they've been taking the government money and looking elsewhere, going to community college or something else. So I think labor is going to be a big thing. But one thing I've liked as far as a shift, I'm not going to say pivot in the supply chain is almost by force, of course, but you're starting to look outside your typical vendor circle. The first example I saw was back in March at Soldier Field. The city of Chicago had a company that cleaned just the suites and the premium areas. That was all they did. They had another company that cleaned their general areas, but the company that cleaned the executive areas was actually a hospital cleaner. That's what they did. Like 98% of their business was cleaning hospitals around the country. But because they had that one little sliver of a relationship with the Bears or with the city of Chicago, the city said, "Can you help us out?" They got the electrostatic misters for them, and then Mario mentioned all the protective equipment. You start going to other people that you never worked with before, because a lot of these companies, we're in Charlotte, Gary, and a lot of the NASCAR companies started making masks and just started using the technology they had in the garages to help make sanitizing units for the masks and stuff. But so there's a lot of ingenuity outside our industry that we can start tapping into, saying, we didn't need you before, we didn't need each other before, but now it makes sense, and you're close, you're local.
Yeah, and I think the ingenuity that comes out of a lot of the things in the sports industry, to your point, David, rally to try, and because everybody wanted to get back to play, everybody wanted to figure out how do we make this a safer environment. So, Richard, what do you think? Comment on that at all? Or?
Well, it's interesting. I mentioned I've been home since March 12th. Law firms as a whole are being impacted as well. I know it's not the sports world, but we're talking about maybe not getting back to the office this year. And then when you do, we may not need as much space because everybody was successful in doing, working from home. That maybe not everybody needs their own office. Maybe we do something called hoteling, which is a concept I'd never even heard of until COVID-19. So where you show up at the office and they just give you whatever open office to use that day, like a hotel room. But so the ingenuity is going to come into play. The unfortunate part about it is, no matter how much ingenuity, we're going to still have incredible financial losses across the board, because for all the jobs lost, we're not picking them up in the ingenuity and COVID cleanup. The best news, of course, is this week and last week with the vaccine and information. The sooner we can get that out, and the sooner the public can stop being afraid, then maybe we can have fans back in arenas and stadiums and people at movie theaters.
Yeah, and you guys alluded to, we talked a little bit about the staffing issues that have arisen. So coming out of this, have you thought about, how you'll recruit, train? What are you doing to look at retaining staff now that you already have on board? I know I've heard comments that some people are uncomfortable coming back yet and working. Other people have situations at home where they have parents or whatever that make it hard. So, Mario, what do you think about that?
It's going to be one of our challenges. When you look typically at a stadium, your labor force is generally older, and those are probably the most vulnerable people. And so there will be some reluctance for them to come back, especially to a stadium that's at 50% or 100% capacity. But I think you treat your employees the same as your guests. Is you're going to have to sell them on how you've taken the extra steps to ensure their safety, and whether it's the protocols, the education, the training. I look at making all our staff health ambassadors going forward, because ultimately our fans and our staff need to know that we've done everything to protect them and to provide our stadium as being safe. And so from that perspective, that's the new focus. You're still going to have the security measures, you're still going to have everything else, but we're going to be investing heavily on technology to make us better. But it's going to come down to the employee being comfortable in this environment. And again, we're going to be very competitive on the wages, but what's going to set us apart between our competition is what we're doing to recruit, to stay engaged with our staff. And let's face it, we've let most of our part-time people go, but we can still communicate to them and keep in touch with them. And I think that's what's going to hopefully help us whenever we come back to normal, or at least resumption of play.
So Mario, you talk about technology. So like, you go in, you've got your electronic ticket. It's a digital ticket, it's not paper. You go in and you know exactly what gate to go into, what route to walk to your seat. You can't leave your seat. And if you do, if you get within, if you see a buddy across the way and you want to go over and talk to him, you get an alert on your phone, and he does too, and security gets an alert. So there's all sorts of apps that are coming out now. I guess I'm wondering to Richard, is there anything, have you dealt with that yet? What if one of these people who breaks one of those rules winds up being a spreader? It's the team. Mario talked about protocol. The team did everything. Everybody's got the app on their phone because you're required to, but you've got a digital trail. You've got cameras that saw you break the rules. So what happens insurance wise there?
Well, that's great questions, David. I want to pick up on one thing Mario said really quickly, though, and that's communication. There's no good time for this pandemic to have come out, but to come out during an election year is probably the worst time for it to come out, because there's so much fear driving people's reactions to it. I mean, if you actually look at some of the statistics, it's not as horrifically terrible as you might be led to believe otherwise, but you have to overcome that. If you're a business, you have to overcome the people worried about coming back to their seats. The question you asked about insurance and litigation, David, is one of the big issues that's going to arise. It hasn't really risen yet. Is how does anybody show causation between how they got the disease and trying to trace it back to, say, sitting at a Dodgers game or a Blue Jays game next year? That's going to be really difficult, because causation is going to be difficult for individual plaintiffs. The insurance that might be implicated would be general liability insurance policies, which would possibly cover it depending on the language of the policy. But that's going to be the same thing. In California, the governor issued an executive order that said, there's going to be a presumption that if you're at work and you contract COVID, you contracted it while you're at work, and therefore workers' comp covers you. And that's not going to fly with somebody suing for hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars because they claim they got COVID because they sat in their house for 8 months and they only went to one thing, and the one thing they went to, oh my gosh, they got COVID. So I think the best strategy for everybody, any business, sports team, leagues, everybody, is complying, like Mario said, with all of the health orders that you have locally, federally, everything you can, putting procedures in place, documenting that you complied with your procedures, and having as good a record keeping as you can possibly have, whether it's electronic records or paper records of, this is checked on this day, this is cleaned on this day. And that's going to be your best defense to a lawsuit. Somebody on the chat asked, what are the trends showing in terms of successful litigation? Shockingly, I'm sure this will shock everybody, the insurance company is throwing everything they have into trying to defeat the business interruption insurance claims as early as possible. So if you just do a scorecard, it's about 28 wins for the carriers and about 7 wins for the policyholders so far. But a big part of that is hiring the right lawyer. And I'm not doing this as a pitch. You should hire an insurance coverage lawyer, but insurance and the insurance policy and how it's interpreted and how the language and the exclusions all work together is something that you need expertise in. And the unfortunate thing here is we see a lot of cases just being filed by lawyers with no insurance experience whatsoever. They're filing cases with policies that have very stringent exclusions that are almost impossible to overcome. So you need the right insurance policy with the right language and the right lawyer, and those cases are the ones that are succeeding.
And I think that really to that point, it's your plan, having a very thoughtful plan, well documented, looking at all best alternatives and being able to support it. Like you'll never be able to 100% guarantee anything, but at least you can say that you've looked at it from every reasonable perspective and mitigated that. And I think that's the best you can do. And the one positive out of COVID, and I'll say this to Richard, is I do appreciate having a virtual discovery versus going in person. So that's probably one benefit. I don't have to go into lawyers' offices anymore. I think virtual actually is a benefit.
Yeah, and I've heard, over and over the point that you made very well a little bit ago, Mario, and that is the companies, the organizations that have had good business continuity plans in place, even if they didn't specifically delve into pandemics, the very fact that they had a framework there has made a big difference. Have all you guys seen this with your interactions with these different groups?
Well, I can jump in quick. Sorry. There's a great example for having good continuity plans in place, and then there are ones where the good plan was in place and they ignored it. The NCAA had a risk management strategy years ago where they had $250, $300 million in insurance coverage, and they had $500 million in tax reserves, thinking that if the worst were to happen and they would cancel Arch Madness, which is between a $700 and a $900 million payday for the NCAA, they'd be okay because they had about $800 million in risk mitigation. And then what happened is, as nothing came up, the $500 million in cash reserves were $400 million, and then they were $100 million, and then there were zero. And they never thought, maybe I should up my insurance policy limits for every dollar I'm reducing in my cash reserves. So they ended up having only $225 million in insurance coverage when they canceled March Madness, which ended up being a 670. They expected to dole out over $600 million to member institutions for this year, this fall season, and they ended up sending out 225. So the $375 million budget deficit for the schools across the country, which put everybody behind the eight ball. And that's why a lot of schools, decided to proceed with football because they couldn't afford the hit. Football makes more money for colleges and universities across the country than the next 35 sports combined makes for them.
Wow.
It's pretty amazing, but these schools were left with almost no choice but to have to proceed.
David, you had a comment?
Oh, on the emergency prep for quite a while, a lot of teams were really putting a focus on getting Safety Act certified.
Yep.
Which was enacted after 9/11, liability protection if an act of terrorism happens at your venue. But then in the past couple of years, I've seen a definite trend of not necessarily doing the full Safety Act, but really focusing, saying, we really don't have an emergency prep program that's been updated maybe ever or in a long time. So I've definitely seen a lot of a trend in the last, I'd say, 2 years of teams focusing heavily on maybe doing their first, but at least updating their emergency prep.
Right. Well, we've spoken a lot here about, having to pivot and having to change and all the things that's happened, a big concentration was on the security, the hospitality, and now all of a sudden we've pivoted over into healthcare. And so a lot of venues have had to hire or bring in people in that environment. I mean, it was one thing to have a team of doctors and stuff that worked with your athletes, right? Now all of a sudden, it's the whole staff, and also looking at reviewing and developing policies and procedures for the people who do attend. I know some places do temperature screening. Other places go, hey, it's not very accurate, so therefore, why am I wasting my time and effort? What has been your experience in trying to pivot into this environment of health safety throughout our sports and entertainment industry? David?
I think it's been slow. One of the things I've done all summer is really followed businesses and sectors that are not in sports and entertainment, but still have a lot of people. So hospitality, airlines, hotels, even amusement parks, and they seemed to all have a plan in place already. Not necessarily for a pandemic. Very few had that, but I think sports is often on the forefront of technology and planning. But I think we were really slow to come out of it. I think we're still slow. A lot of the hotel companies and airlines I mentioned teamed up right away with Clorox or Lysol and had very PR heavy announcements early on in this. And the sports was really slow. The NBA, every team is now required to have a chief medical officer. Most of those were promoted from within, probably from that pool you mentioned, Gary. And actually the NBA, I think, teamed up with Mayo Clinic too. But I mean, now every league has, but I think it's been really, really slow. And just from as a fan, I want you as a team or a league to keep reminding me over and over about what you're doing to make the venue safe. Show it. It should be on the front page of at least a sports page. Show me the drone, even if you're just testing the drone to clean the stadium. Just keep reminding me that you are doing something every day to get me back in there. So that's my answer. I think we've been slow to catch up.
Yep. Mario?
Gary, to your question about pivoting, I look at technology as being that sort of medium to pivot, because I think we all looked at stadiums. Let's talk about cashless. We looked at that, but maybe that's 2 or 3 years down the road because you've had to invest in your infrastructure first. Everybody was quick to jump on Wi-Fi, bandwidth, but all these services dependent on your infrastructure. But all of a sudden now, I think most venues are looking at, how do I accelerate that? Because I want to be able to not only have the cashless environment, because that gets down to our fans, because no one wants to be touching money or passing any food and beverage around. So we're getting creative in terms of how we meet their specific needs. I think venues and sports fans in particular, because we have the ability of selling individual tickets, we can control where people go and how we contain them from each other. And I think that's the one advantage that we have. Our advantage is, or our challenge is really to layer one system after another into this new format. So I think David talked about that digital ticket on your wallet or your phone, contactless entry, but then be able to track their spending behaviors. So we know that they're only going to leave their seat to go to the concessions or to the facilities. And how do we track that? And how do we ensure that there isn't a backlog or a lineup where they're physically distancing? Physically distancing, I think, will be here for a while. People are going to expect it. And I think, we talked about the vaccine. That's still going to take some time. And there's still going to be a small portion of our fans who may not want to agree that it's going to help them and just may not want to take it or can. But I think ultimately they're going to change how they buy, their spending, and how they, operate in a facility. And so that's where we as organizations have an opportunity to change that behavior by showing to them, to David's point, that we've taken the extra measures. They can see how clean the building is. They can see how our staff are behaving with them, and it's going to be a positive message. And so one experience, word of mouth, people want to come back as long as we do our job in maintaining that environment. But for us, it's about touchless environments. And even from a security perspective, how do you do your inspections? No bags anymore. That's probably going to be a trend going forward. No more food coming in because that means security is going to be checking it. So if we can change our policies, because I think the public's probably going to be very receptive if they see that it's done from a COVID perspective to ensure their safety.
Yeah. Richard?
Well, I'm just going to agree with Mario and David in this regard because in my practice, I don't really have those issues yet. I mean, I think the impact is going to be felt down the road. And so planning this next season coming up is we're going to see a lot of changes. And then we're going to see, I think Mario made a great point about, where are people's discretionary dollars, if they have any, going to go in the coming months and year.
And we've talked a little bit about it, but it's changing the whole dynamic of food and drink and souvenir service within these venues, right? I mean, not just the cashless, but how it's delivered or served up, because a lot of them don't have the capacity to queue lines and separate people at 6 feet, particularly some of the older facilities that have narrow concourses and stuff. So, what else do you see going down that line that you think is optimistic from your perspective that will be a good thing for venues, whether they're sports or entertainment? Because most of the venues today I'm aware of go both directions. I mean, they're doing concerts as well as a sporting event. They're looking to maximize. And I think when you come out of this, it's only going to be really more use of that facility. So do you see big changes in food service and souvenir shops and stuff like that?
Now, I think it's more about the fan and that experience and convenience. So if you can order for that shirt to be delivered to your seat or picked up at a location without you having to physically walk into a retail location or a concourse and pick it, that's the convenience. And I think most stadiums are talking about how do we deliver that same, whether it's food or beverage or souvenirs, retail. You're still going to have your team stores that operate, 7 days a week, if you will, but during a venue, during an event, you're going to have to rethink about how you are able to meet that need of our consumers or our fans. And I think the virtual kiosk idea or selling, with your phone is probably the way most facilities are going to look at this. But it's also an opportunity because now we may not need to have the traditional concourse kiosk anymore if this really works. And I think stadiums will look at how we currently have our concession set up and say, is there an opportunity to change? How do we use our space to maximize, the physically distancing and maybe redo some stands to make it more efficient? So I think clubs and facilities are going to spend some money on capital improvements to meet these needs, but I think going forward, it'll probably make our venues a little more accessible.
David?
Well, I'm going to jump in
Go, Richard. Yeah.
From a fan experience. I mean, I usually don't like going to an arena or a stadium and sitting in a suite because you don't have that experience of feeling the action of being right next to the fans going crazy when, stuff happens during a game. And that's going to be an impact we're going to see felt for a long time. If you're 6 feet apart from one another, or if you have entire rows blocked off. When I went to the World Series, they had a row, only certain seats in one row. The next row had huge zip ties tying back every seat. There were no merchandise sales whatsoever. I mean, they had them, but they had no, team specific ones because the playoffs were so condensed. And one day the team won Game 7, and 2 days later they were playing a World Series game. So a lot of it's going to change, and a lot of it's going to be, virtual purchases and having stuff delivered to your seats. But we're all going to, sports fans actually like, the shared experience with their fellow fans, and that's going to be a tough one to try and measure.
Yeah, the great part of going to a baseball game when I was a kid was the person coming down hawking drinks and popcorn and yeah, that was cool, you know?
Or especially just watching them order, you raise your hand for a hot dog and
Yes.
you're 39 feet away
Yeah.
and he drops it in your lap. I'm going to miss
Yeah.
that. Now, the shared experience, I will not miss ordering a beer and have it pass through 17 hands before it gets to me and just pray that I get 12 out of 16 ounces actually delivered to me. I won't miss that. But yeah, I think Mario's right. I think the team store is going to change. For now, it's going to be virtual, get it delivered, or if you actually want to go in and peruse, you'll have to make a reservation, like a Disney Fast Pass. I'm coming up to the gift shop. Well, my reservation's in 10 minutes. I'll be right back, guys. That
Better still have it delivered to your house before you come to the stadium.
that's true. That's
Yeah.
even better. Yeah. But it opens up other stuff. Like, so if you are able to reduce your team store, what goes there? You're not going to put another kid space there, because what's going to happen to all the kid spaces now? Certainly not going to be used right now. So I think that kind of dominoes into the other touching areas, and then how are they going to be paid for? If fewer people are ordering in venue food or merchandise, then who's paying for that $500,000 in touchless toilets and sinks? That's a revenue stream that's probably going to go for a little while we're all spending capital funds to make it better for you to come here. So come here and spend money, please.
Yeah, and I saw something on TV about a week ago, and boy, it really struck me just how much our sports and entertainment serve as a sanity break day in and day out for our whole society. It's an outlet, it's a release, and when you don't have that around, or it's limited, I think that really, impacts the psyche of our citizens all over the world. I mean, it's not just something here. I mean, it's all over.
Another cultural impact that very few people talk about in the sports world is the impact on youth sports.
Yes.
Thank you.
They talked all about it during, the World Series, when you watch the games on TV, about donating to Little League, but club sports, Olympic sports, soccer, families aren't spending that money, not only because they don't have the money, because a quarter of the people are out of work, but they're not even being offered. You can't have those sports. And so
Take that one step further and talk about scholarships.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that comes into play with the reduction in money that the NCAA was able to share with its member institutions. I mean, the trickle down effect of this is going to be felt for decades. The other impact is, you got Title IX considerations. A lot of, Title IX requires women's sports and men's sports to have the same ratio as the student body, but almost no women's sports generates income for universities, just like most of the baseball, basketball, football. But that was a great avenue for people to learn how to work as a team and to build confidence and maybe become, future leaders in society, because you had all of those experiences that sports give you, but you may not have those as kids anymore. You may not be able to play Little League and youth soccer and know that you can't talk back to the coaches or talk back to referees, there's so many cultural impacts of it that they're almost impossible to measure.
Yeah. Either of you guys, any comment on that? I mean, the kids, the stars of today were the kids of yesterday that played those sports and honed those skills, right?
And it's also, somebody mentioned earlier the communal part of sports. But I mean, how many times do you go to a Little League game or a youth soccer game and 10 family members are there per kid, and now you're allowed 2? So I think that's a big part of it too. That's going to be felt for a long time.
We're not even allowed to have Thanksgiving in California.
Hey, so
yeah, some European countries are the same way practically. I mean, they're like bound to their houses nowadays. As we get ready and wrap up here, I would like to take the opportunity to go around with each of you and say, hey, what are the takeaways that you want the folks that attended our session here? What are the things they should be thinking about or taking away from your perspective? And you know, how can they maybe make a difference from what we're sharing with them? So who wants to lead off?
I guess from my perspective, it's really about networking and sharing information. And it's not about trying to do it by yourself. Is realize there's this whole industry that can help each other out, and picking up the phone and calling someone, even if you don't know them. I think we're pretty receptive to sharing, because if I can learn from a different industry, whether it's the theater or a concert or another league or internationally, then I'm going to take something from that conversation and saying, can it work here or will it work here? So I think the networking, this is the perfect forum for that. And that's why I think this conference is so important from a timing perspective. Is we need to rely on each other, and you know, R&D might be rip off and duplicate, but it's okay, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to fight the same battle, which is how do we get our businesses back up and open our doors to our fans.
Yeah, I think so, Mario. Good point.
To me, it's expectations. I mean, we're all, as fans, expecting the venue to be safe and sanitized and secure. And I think fans are going to have a much, I don't want to say unrealistic, but have a different set of expectations going back to a game. We're going to be excited for sure, but I think I'm hoping that fans also recognize that there's a set of expectations that the venue operators, the teams, the sponsors, that everybody has. I mean, we all know teams need sponsors and media partners, but very few people respect the rules once you're told you don't have to respect the rules. If you're going to a concert in a stadium that you also go to a game to, it's still going to be social distancing. It's still going to be the same rules, but it's just going to be, you're gonna. I think the expectations are going to have to be. You're going to have to realize that there's different expectations from both sides.
I'll
Good
just
point.
jump in, Gary, with
Sure.
the takeaway for me is kind of goes hand in hand with what Mario and David just talked about, but information is power. And, you know, the more you arm yourself with information regarding how to battle, how to deal with these issues, but also if you're a business, don't assume that you don't have insurance coverage for these losses. If you reach out and seek information, and anybody who's attending has, feel free to drop me an email if you want to. I'm happy to talk to anybody about these issues, but just don't assume, and don't let your insurance company or broker tell you that you don't have insurance for COVID-19 losses, because you may well have it. And if you do, it may well, save your business.
Now, listen, guys, I think these are all good points. Really good discussion. We covered a lot of ground in there, but let's really hope that it's sooner versus later that we can get back to enjoying the sports and entertainment to some degree the way we used to. I'm not sure that it'll ever get back exactly. Time changes things and events change things, but I really appreciate all the points that you brought forth. So thank you, David, Mario, and Richard, for a great conversation today. The business implications of COVID-19 have been catastrophic for the sports and entertainment industry this year. But as you guys have shown, you react, you respond. It's not an end, it's just a new beginning. There are long-term implications for the future, like the supply chain, policies, protocols, staffing, training, insurance, legal, all these things. But I think that we're able to respond to them. I think we'll react and come out of this. I'm very optimistic that we're going to come out of this in good shape. So thanks again to each of you. This has been fantastic. Thank you again to Babel Street, whose generous sponsorship made this presentation possible. And most importantly, thank you to all of those attending the session here at the conference. Also, please take time to visit our sponsors and exhibitors at their booths in the exhibit area. Make sure to fill your digital swag bags with their offerings. You can also schedule meetings with the representatives of each of these sponsors of the booths. And we invite each of you to join IIFX and other sports and entertainment fans and professionals as we build a path to return to work, play, and spectate. You can find more information about our activities and programming at the IIFX.org. So thank you, and everyone have a good day.